This is the Ise Shrine. It's a Shinto shrine in Ise, Japan, and the shrine has been there for 1,300 years. And seeing that, the Japanese government thought to have this listed in the UNESCO Registry of Historic Places. And when they did that, UNESCO said, roughly, get out of our face with that 1,300-year stuff. There's no way that building is that old. We're not listing it. So why the disagreement? The shrine, as you can see, is built out of wood, never a material prized for millennial-scale structural integrity. But the Imbe priests who run the shrine know that. So periodically, they have a ceremony where they tear the shrine to the ground. And then they go to the forest, where the wood from the original shrine, built in 690, came from, and they build another shrine out of the same kind of material on the same spot to the same architectural plan. And from their point of view, since the function of the shrine is to delineate sacred space from ordinary space, the shrine has been there for 1,300 years. It's just built out of renewable materials. UNESCO's response was, that's not what we mean when we say historic. Right? What we care about is solidity of edifice, not solidity of process. Hold that thought. In 1995, I was in charge of technology for a little web shop in Manhattan. There were a dozen of us working out of Seth Goldstein's living room. It was very picturesque. And like the dog that caught the proverbial dog that caught the bus, we landed AT&T as a client. We had some calendaring technology they wanted to use. They hired us to build some websites. And once the ink on the contract was dry, the engineers came around. And so, of course, we had to have a fight about programming languages. It's like hello between techies. So this was big culture clash. Most of those guys had been at AT&T longer than most of us had been out of college. They were C++ engineers, C++ having been invented at AT&T. We were Perl hackers, so already they were horrified. And we fought back and forth about the relative merits of each language. And the place they really thought they had us was on support. Where could you possibly get commercial support for Perl? And we said, we don't have any. You don't have any support? And we said, we didn't say that. We said we don't have commercial support. We get our support from the Perl community. And from the looks on their faces, you could tell it was as if we had told them, we get our Thursdays from a banana. Like, it just didn't make any sense what we just said. They'd never heard the words community and support in the same sentence. So we said, no, look, there's this news group, Comp Lang Perl Misc. Right? And we go to that news group, and we post our questions, and other people answer them, and other people post their questions, and we answer them. We all kind of get it done together. This did not make any sense. More arguing. Look, we said, we'll show you. So we come up with a moderately complicated question. We post it to Usenet. We had an answer before the meeting was over. And it was at that moment that I understood what was going on, because they didn't care. They didn't care that they'd seen it work in practice because they already knew it couldn't work in theory. Right? Support is critical. You don't get support from something as evanescent as an unspoken bargain in a community. Support comes from something concrete like a contract with a company. Right? So we had that argument a dozen years ago. What's going on now? Well, the slide I just pulled up, and I'll pull up again, is actually from yesterday. This is from Comp Lang Perl Misc from yesterday. People are still asking questions. People are still answering questions. With the explosion of social media that we've seen, there's obviously lots and lots of places to talk about Perl now. But the original site of the conversation and the source of the argument, Comp Lang Perl Misc, is doing fine. And AT&T? How's AT&T doing? Not as fine, right? So, in fact, right, the solidity was on the side of the thing that looked evanescent. Perl is a Shinto shrine. Perl exists not as an edifice, but as an act of love. Perl is a viable programming option again today because millions of people woke up this morning loving Perl. And more importantly, they love one another in the context of Perl. They love one another enough to stop what they're doing and listen to each other, to have a conversation, to Denise's point, and to answer questions for one another, to diagnose things for one another, sometimes to write code for one another. Oh, I think I see what's going wrong. Here, try this. Right. No contracts are written, no money changes hands, the work goes on. We don't often talk about love at gatherings like this. It seems too squishy. It certainly seemed too squishy to the AT&T guys. But what has happened, what is happening in our generation, right, is that we have a set of tools for aggregating things that people care about in ways that increase both the scope and the longevity in ways that were unpredictable even a decade ago. Right? The coordinating tools we now have, and I'm not talking about anything fancy, I'm talking about mailing lists and Usenet and weblogs and wikis. Those tools turn love into a renewable building material. Right? In the middle of the 90s, most software was commercially manufactured, but there were a handful of things whose only visible means of support was love plus mailing lists, which doesn't seem like a very auspicious place to start. Perl, Apache, Linux. But standing there and looking to today, and more importantly, standing from today, looking towards the future, you will make more accurate predictions about software and, in this web-driven world, about services. If you ask yourself not what's the business model, but rather, do the people who like it take care of each other? That turns out to be the better predictor of longevity. The Imbe priests would totally get Linux. Linux gets rebuilt every night by people whose principal goal is that it continue to exist the following morning. Now, this doesn't mean that the market is going to wither away and we're all going to live in some sort of lovely post-capitalist commune. Right? There's lots of commercial opportunity. There has always been lots of commercial opportunity. There will always be lots of commercial opportunity. It does mean that the ability to aggregate non-financial motivations, to get people together outside of managerial culture and for reasons other than the profit motive, has received a huge comparative advantage. And it also means that many of the future commercial opportunities are going to be inextricably intertwined with that kind of work and those kind of groups. Right? When Linus Torvalds posted his first message in 1991, hinting at what Linux was to become, it's a very modest message. I've got this little hobby project in mind. Within 24 hours, he had responses from Stuttgart, from Vienna, from San Jose, from Sydney. He had a global network of collaborators not asking for anything other than the chance to come together and do something interesting. That was new. And that pattern of aggregating caring into something stable and long-lasting is going everywhere. Wikipedia, the anti-immigration protests in the California schools that were coordinated through MySpace. Right? The monitoring of the Nigerian elections by a loose collection of people using SMS and camera phones to watch their own elected officials. The use of Flickr to coordinate information and disaster relief after the Indian Ocean tsunami, after the London transit bombings, after the Madrid bombings. And the number of places that pattern will go in the future is much greater than the number of places that pattern has already gone. We have always loved one another. We're human. It's something we're good at. But up until recently, the radius and half-life of that affection has been quite limited. With love alone, you can get a birthday party together. Add coordinating tools, and you can write an operating system. In the past, we would do little things for love, but big things required money. Now, we can do big things for love. Thank you.
I love you.
I love you too, Kevin.
I love you too.